The fog arrived before the sun. It rolled in from the Mississippi in heavy, deliberate waves, sliding between warehouses and alley mouths, swallowing the riverfront inch by inch, as if the water itself had decided to crawl inland. By the time the bells of St. Louis Cathedral rang the first thin notes of morning prayer, the city of New Orleans looked unfinished, edges blurred, corners softened, the familiar made uncertain. But wait for a second before we continue towards the video. Let us know in the comments which country you are watching from and what time of day it is for you. And don't forget to subscribe. Gas lamps burned weakly along Chartres Street, their yellow light diffused into halos by the mist. Iron balconies loomed overhead like skeletal ribs. Somewhere a mule brayed, sharp and lonely, and the sound echoed longer than it should have. In the courtyard behind the St. Louis Hotel, men gathered quietly. They did not speak loudly at first. The fog encouraged discretion. Boots scraped against damp cobblestone, wool coats brushed one another. Leather gloves creaked as fingers flexed against the cold. These men knew one another by reputation, if not by name. Planters from upriver, merchants from the docks, speculators who never dirtied their own hands. Some had ridden since midnight. Some had walked from nearby rooms where they had slept poorly, already calculating profits before dawn. They had come early for a reason. She was worth seeing before the sun rose. The wooden auction platform stood at the center of the courtyard, raised just high enough to command attention. Its boards were dark with age and moisture, the grain worn smooth by decades of use. A single lantern hung from a post beside it, its flame trembling whenever the fog shifted. On that platform stood a young woman alone. Her name, spoken only in the silence of her own mind, was Eliza Mayhew. She was 20 years old, though the men studying her could not have said how they knew it. There was something in the way she stood, neither girl nor matron, neither soft nor hardened, that suggested a precise crossing point between youth and endurance. She was tall for a woman, her height immediately noticeable even among the men who tried not to stare outright. Her body was slender, but not fragile. The lines of her arms and shoulders spoke of work, of carrying weight without complaint. Her posture was straight, not from training but from habit and instinctive refusal to fold inward. Her skin held a warm bronze tone, catching what little light there was and returning it softly as if it had its own memory of the sun. Her heritage was unmistakable and yet difficult for the onlookers to categorize neatly, which unsettled them more than they liked to admit. Her mother, African blood, lived in the strength of her frame, the texture of her hair. Her father's French features shaped her face in ways that drew the eye and held it longer than courtesy allowed. Her dark brown curls, thick and stubborn, fell to her shoulders when unbound. This morning they were gathered back with a faded indigo headscarf, the fabric worn thin and frayed at the edges from years of washing. A few rebellious strands escaped, curling at her temples and the nape of her neck, dampened slightly by the fog. Her eyes were what unsettled them most. They were hazel, almond-shaped, and unnervingly steady, not wide with fear, not narrowed with defiance, simply observant, measuring, recording, remembering. When they moved across the crowd, they did so without urgency, as though she were the one taking inventory. A faint scar curved beneath her left collarbone, pale and old, visible where the neckline of her dress dipped. It was not the kind of scar that invited questions. It was the kind that suggested survival without explanation. She wore a simple off-white linen dress, plain to the point of anonymity. The fabric had been good once. Now it was worn thin at the elbows and along the hem, softened by time and use. It hung loosely from her shoulders, cinched at the waist with a narrow cord. There were no adornments, no attempt at flattery. She was barefoot. The cold of the stone had already begun to creep upward into her soles, but she did not shift her weight or curl her toes. Around her ankles were faint marks, old iron rubs, long-healed but never forgotten. Her hands were bound loosely in front of her with hemp rope, not tight enough to bruise, tight enough to remind. The auctioneer waited until the courtyard filled. He was a small man with a large voice, his coat buttoned tight against the morning chill. He cleared his throat once, then again, as though preparing his instrument. "Gentlemen," he called, his voice cutting through the fog, "thank you for coming out early." The murmurs stilled. Eliza lifted her chin a fraction higher. "This young woman comes from a respectable household," the auctioneer continued. "Raised indoors, proper manners, clean habits." A few heads nodded. A few pens scratched notes. "She speaks both French and English," she went on. "Reads some, writes her name." That drew more interest. Literacy was always a risk and an asset. "She has no known illnesses," he said, "no bad habits, sound teeth, sound limbs." He gestured, and one of the attendants stepped forward, lifting Eliza's chin briefly, turning her head side to side. She allowed it without resistance, her expression unchanged, though her jaw tightened for the briefest moment. The men leaned in slightly, as if drawn by gravity. "Strong constitution," the auctioneer said. "Good breeding stock." Eliza's gaze did not flicker. She had learned long ago that fear, once offered, was consumed eagerly. She had learned that stillness unnerved them more than tears ever could. The bidding began cautiously. Numbers were spoken low at first, tentative feelers sent into the air. Each increase brought a subtle shift in posture among the crowd, calculations recalibrated, limits tested. The fog thickened and thinned in slow pulses, revealing and concealing faces like a living curtain. Eliza watched them watch her. She recognized types easily now. The ones who imagined her in a kitchen, the ones who imagined her in a field, the ones who imagined her nowhere in particular, only as an investment line in a ledger. She did not look at the men who licked their lips. Instead, her eyes paused on a figure standing slightly apart from the others near the edge of the courtyard where the fog gathered deepest. He had not raised his hand. He had not spoken. He stood with his gloved hands folded behind his back, posture precise, almost rigid. He was tall, though not imposing in the way of men who relied on bulk. His build was spare, controlled. His black wool coat was cut cleanly, without ornament, the fabric clearly expensive but not new. His face was sharp, angular, marked by time rather than indulgence. Steel-gray eyes observed the proceedings with unsettling focus, missing nothing. His dark hair, neatly combed, was threaded with silver at the temples. He did not look at Eliza the way the others did. He looked at her the way a man looks at a locked door, considering not its surface but what lay behind it. When the bidding rose sharply, he lifted his hand once. The number he named silenced the courtyard. A murmur rippled outward, quick and surprised. Several men glanced at him openly now, irritation flickering across their faces. A few dropped out immediately. The auctioneer's eyebrows rose, but he recovered quickly. "Do I hear more?" he called. Another bid followed, then another. The man answered each one calmly, without hesitation, his voice even, his gaze never leaving Eliza's face. She met his eyes. For the first time that morning, something shifted. It was not fear. It was recognition not of the man himself, but of the weight behind his interest. He was not buying beauty. He was buying something else. The final bid fell from his mouth like a verdict. No one challenged it. The gavel struck wood with a sound that seemed too loud in the fog. Sold. The word echoed. The men began to disperse, conversation resuming in low tones. Coins changed hands. Papers were signed. The moment passed as moments always did, absorbed into routine. Eliza remained on the platform until the attendant gestured for her to step down. She did so without hurry. Within the hour, she was placed inside a closed carriage. The rope was removed from her wrists, though two men sat outside the door watchful. The interior smelled faintly of leather and old paper. The city slid past in muffled impressions as the carriage moved, church spires emerging from fog, then vanishing, dock workers, silhouettes bending and straightening, birds lifting suddenly from unseen perches. The man sat opposite her. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the old scars on his hands where the gloves no longer covered. He removed them carefully and placed them beside him, fingers steepled. "You understand why you were expensive," he said at last. "Yes," Eliza replied. Her voice was steady, low, educated. He studied her not for her answer, but for how she had given it. "I am not buying you for a house," he continued, "or a bed." The carriage rocked slightly over uneven stone. "I am buying you because you were taught something you were never meant to survive knowing." Eliza did not look away. "My mother taught me many things," she said. "And her mother before her," he replied softly. The fog thickened against the windows, the city receded, and the secret silent, living, dangerous traveled with her. The carriage moved slowly at first, wheels creaking in a patient rhythm as it threaded through streets still half asleep. Fog pressed against the glass like a living thing, blurring the city into impressions rather than places. Eliza felt each turn, not through sight but through motion, the subtle shift of weight, the faint lean of the carriage, the change in sound as stone gave way to packed earth. The man opposite her watched in silence. He had said his piece and now waited. as if he understood that whatever followed could not be hurried. His steel-gray eyes held a disciplined stillness, not unkind, not curious in the way men often were. Calculating, yes, but calculation of a specific sort. He was measuring consequence, not appetite. Eliza folded her hands in her lap, wrists free now, fingers lightly interlaced. The faint rope marks would fade by evening, others would not. "You haven't asked my name," she said at last. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the truth of it. "Names can be liabilities," he replied. "Yours most of all." She studied him more openly now. Up close, the sharpness of his face suggested a man who had learned early to pare himself down to remove softness where it could be used against him. His coat, though removed now and folded neatly beside him, was of excellent quality, it seems precise. Not plantation wealth, then, or not only that. "Still," she said, "you bought me. You should know what to call me." He considered this, then nodded once. "Eliza Mayhew." Her breath caught before she could stop it. He noticed, of course. "My apologies," he said mildly. "I make it a point to know what I am purchasing." "You did purchase a name," she said. "You purchased a body." "Bodies are common," he replied. "Information is not." The carriage slowed as they crossed a narrow bridge, the sound of water below momentarily clear through the fog. Eliza felt the old instinct stir, the mental marking of direction, the counting of seconds, the mapping of unseen paths. She pushed it down. This was not the Delta. This was the city, stone and rules and walls. "Who taught you?" he asked. She did not answer immediately. "My mother," she said finally. Before that, her mother. And before that, there are no records. "There are always records," he said. "They are simply not written down." She smiled faintly at that. It was the first expression she had allowed herself since dawn, and it changed her face, entirely softening it, yes, but also sharpening something underneath. He noticed the shift and filed it away. "You know what I am referring to," he continued. "So let's avoid the theater." "Theater is for people who believe they are being watched," she said. "You've gone to great trouble to make sure we are not." A corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "You're observant. I am alive," she replied. "The two are often related." The carriage turned again. The smell of the river faded, replaced by brick dust and old iron. The neighborhood changed subtly, fewer voices, wider streets, houses set back behind gates and low walls. "My name is Julian Carver," he said at last. "You may use it when we are alone, and when we are not. Then you won't need to speak at all." The statement was not a threat. It was an instruction. They rode in silence for several minutes after that. Eliza watched condensation gather and slide down the glass, each droplet tracing a brief, vanishing path. She imagined routes in her mind, despite herself, how water moved, how fog followed low ground, how people could disappear if they knew where to step. "You said I was expensive," she said quietly, "but not why." Carver's gaze shifted to the window, following the fog outside. "Because you're dangerous." "That is not what the auctioneer said." "The auctioneer sells stories," he replied. "I buy endings." She turned that over slowly. "And mine?" she asked. He met her eyes again, and for the first time she saw something like hesitation. "That depends," he said, "on whether you understand the value of silence." The carriage slowed, then stopped. Carver opened the door himself and stepped down, extending a hand not to help her, but to indicate where she should go. Eliza followed him out into the morning. The house stood at the edge of Esplanade Avenue, tall and narrow, its brick facade darkened by years of river damp and soot. Ironwork framed the windows in clean, severe lines. The gate opened soundlessly at Carver's touch. Inside, the air changed. The smell was unmistakable: ink, leather, old paper, and beneath it all, something metallic, iron or blood or both. The house did not feel lived in so much as maintained, each object serving a purpose beyond decoration. She was not taken to a kitchen. She was not shown a sleeping pallet. She was led down a narrow corridor to a door reinforced with iron bands. Carver unlocked it with a key worn smooth from use. The study beyond was larger than she expected, its ceiling high, its walls almost entirely covered in maps, not the decorative sort that adorned parlors, but working maps creased, annotated, layered atop one another like palimpsests. River routes twisted across parchment in ink both black and red. Symbols repeated in patterns she recognized instantly, though she had never seen them written. Her chest tightened. "You recognize them?" Carver said, watching her carefully. "Yes," she answered. You shouldn't have them. And yet, he said, here they are. A heavy desk dominated the center of the room, its surface scarred by years of use. Ledgers lay open, their columns filled with precise handwriting. A single candle burned low, casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. Carver removed his gloves and set them aside. His hands bore old cuts, the kind earned not by labor, but by haste, paper edges, sharp tools, moments when care had been sacrificed to urgency. You carry the rest, he said, not on paper. He knew. Eliza walked slowly along the wall, her eyes tracking familiar bends and forks in the drawn waterway. She could feel the map unfolding in her mind. Each path layered atop memory, where the ground dipped, where the reeds grew thick, where sound carried too far. My mother told me never to draw it, she said, never to speak it, never to teach it to someone who didn't already know. And yet she taught you, Carver said. She taught me to survive. He nodded once. And now, she turned to face him fully. Now you want me to stop others from surviving, she said. Carver did not deny it. I want you contained, he said. Not harmed, not exploited. Contained. A gilded cage is still a cage, she replied. He gestured toward the barred windows. These are iron, not gold. She almost laughed. How long? She asked. He considered. As long as the map remains dangerous. It will always be dangerous, she said. Yes, he agreed. That is the problem. Silence settled between them, heavy but not hostile. You will never leave this house, Carver said at last, but you will never be touched. No one will raise a hand to you. No one will claim you. And if I refuse? She asked. He held her gaze steadily. Then others will come looking for what you know, and they will not be so restrained. Eliza felt the truth of that settle into her bones. She looked again at the maps, at the barred windows, at the locked door. This was not freedom, but it was not death. Very well, she said. Carver exhaled slowly, as though he had been holding his breath longer than he realized. I will have meals brought, he said. Books if you wish. Paper if you promise not to draw. She smiled faintly. I don't need paper. I know, he said. He moved toward the door, then paused. You should understand something, he added. I did not buy you because you are beautiful. She met his eyes again. I bought you because you are impossible. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. Eliza stood alone in the study, surrounded by maps that mirrored the one etched into her mind. Outside, the fog lifted slowly from the city. Inside, Cage settled into place. The first thing Eliza learned about the house was that it listened. Not in the way living things listened, not with ears or intention, but with a patience that made sound feel permanent. Footsteps echoed longer than they should have. Doors carried memory in their hinges. Even the air seemed to hold on to words after they were spoken, reluctant to let them dissolve. She stood alone in the study long after Carver's footsteps faded down the corridor. The candle burned steadily, its flame barely wavering despite the draught that crept in through the edges of the barred windows. Outside, the fog thinned as the sun climbed, but the light that reached her was muted, filtered through iron and grime and old glass. Eliza moved closer to the maps. She did not touch them at first. Her eyes traced the lines instinctively, recognizing the mistakes before she recognized the accuracies. A bend in the river drawn too sharply. A marsh flattened into uniformity. A stretch of land marked passable that would swallow a man whole if he tried. Someone had drawn these with knowledge, but not with intimacy. They knew roots. They did not know the land. That distinction mattered. She exhaled slowly, forcing her shoulders to loosen. Survival, her mother had taught her, was not about resistance in every moment. It was about choosing the moments that mattered. The study door opened again before the candle burned halfway down. Carver returned without announcement, carrying a small tray. He set it on the desk, bread, cheese, a cup of water, another of weak coffee. Practical, no ceremony. You haven't eaten since yesterday, he said. I did. He asked for food, Eliza replied. No, he agreed. But you need it. She watched him carefully as he moved about the room, unlocking a cabinet, removing a ledger, then relocking it with the same measured care. Every action was deliberate, practiced. This was a man who trusted routines more than people. You won't poison me, she said. No, he replied. That would defeat the purpose. She took the bread anyway, breaking off a piece and chewing slowly. The simple act grounded her, pulled her back into her body. Hunger had a way of making the mind reckless. Carver leaned against the desk, folding his arms. "You understand the position you were in," he said. "I understand you are afraid," she replied. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Of you? Of what happens if I am not here," she said. "And of what happens if I am." That earned a brief, humorless smile. "You were sharper than most," he admitted. "I had to be." He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing the cost of honesty against the risk of deception. "You were not the first," he said finally. Eliza paused mid-bite. "The first what?" "The first to carry the map," he clarified. "But you were the last." She swallowed. "Others tried to write it," he continued. "To sell it, to trade it for protection or passage or favor, they were all found." Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the house. "And my mother?" she asked quietly. Carver's gaze held steady. She was careful. "Yes," Eliza said. "She was." He gestured toward the maps. "Careful enough to teach you without leaving a trace." Eliza set the bread down. "My mother taught me to remember," she said. "Not to preserve. Preservation creates objects. Objects can be taken, and memory can be extracted," Carver said. She shook her head. "Not like paper." They stood in silence again, the unspoken weight of shared understanding pressing in around them. That night, Eliza was shown a small room adjoining the study. It was not a cell. It had a narrow bed, a wash basin, a chair. The window was barred like the others, but it opened enough to let in air. A lock secured the door from the outside. Carver watched her take in the space without comment. "This is sufficient," she said. He nodded. "If you require anything—" "I want—" She interrupted. He did not take offense. When the door closed, Eliza sat on the edge of the bed and let the quiet settle. The house breathed around her. She counted footsteps as they passed outside her door, one guard, light on his feet. Another heavier, slower. Carver's step was unmistakable, measured, restrained, never rushed. She slept lightly. At dawn, she woke before the lights changed. Days passed. Meals arrived regularly. Books followed: history, mathematics, geography. Carver tested her subtly, leaving volumes open to specific pages, watching which passages she lingered over. She did not give him the satisfaction of confirmation. She spoke little, but she listened. The house had patterns. The guards changed shifts every 6 hours. The back gate was opened briefly at midday to receive deliveries. The cook hummed when nervous. Carver paced when thinking, always 3 lengths of the study, always turning at the same places. On the 5th day, a visitor arrived. Eliza knew before she heard him. The house reacted. Footsteps were heavier, less disciplined. Voices rose slightly in the front rooms, the tone unfamiliar, too loud, too confident. Eliza moved to the door and placed her palm flat against the wood, feeling the vibration of movement beyond. The lock clicked open. Carver stood there, expression carefully neutral. "Stay here," he said. "You don't tell me to stay unless you're worried," Eliza replied. He hesitated, just long enough to confirm it. "This does not concern you," he said. "Everything that enters this house concerns me," she said calmly, "because I cannot leave it." Carver held her gaze, then stepped aside. The visitor stood in the study, his presence filling the room in a way that had nothing to do with size. He was heavy-set, red-faced, his coat strained tight across his middle. His eyes were quick, darting, taking in the maps on the walls with undisguised interest. "Well," the man said, smiling broadly, "you weren't exaggerating." Carver's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "This is a private matter," Carver said. "You shouldn't be here." "On the contrary," the man replied, "I should have been invited sooner." His gaze slid to Eliza. Something in it made her spine straighten. Not desire, appraisal. "That her?" he asked. Carver did not answer immediately. "Yes," he said at last. The man chuckled. "Beautiful," he said. "Dangerous, too, from what I hear." Eliza met his eyes without flinching. "What do you hear?" she asked. The man's smile widened. "That you know how to make people disappear." Carver turned sharply. Enough. But the damage was done. The visitor stepped closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "You see," he said to Eliza, "men like him like to keep secrets locked up. Men like me prefer to sell them." Eliza said nothing. She was already counting. That night the house did not sleep. The visitor remained for dinner, for drinks, for conversation that grew looser as the hours passed. Carver's control frayed at the edges, his movements sharper, his voice clipped. Eliza watched from the shadows of the study doorway. The visitor, his eyes followed her whenever he thought no one noticed. When night finally settled and the house grew quiet again, Eliza lay awake, the map in her mind unfolding with ruthless clarity. She knew the rhythm now. She knew the flaw. Just before dawn, when the fog returned and the guards grew complacent, believing danger slept as they did, Eliza rose from her bed. She did not hurry. The house listened. And for the first time, it listened to her. The fog returned before dawn, just as Eliza knew it would. It crept in low and deliberate, sliding under doors, pressing against window bars, softening the edges of the world until distance became suggestion rather than fact. The house responded the way it always did, wood contracting slightly, iron cooling, the quiet deepening into something almost physical. Eliza stood barefoot on the floor of her small room, listening. The visitor, as presence, had altered the rhythm of the house. Even in sleep, he disrupted it. His breathing was louder, uneven. He had taken the guest room at the front of the house, close to the street, a choice that spoke of confidence bordering on carelessness. Carver had argued against it. Eliza had heard that too. She moved silently, the way her mother had taught her, placing the outside of her foot down first, letting her weight follow only after the floor accepted it. The door to her room opened without a sound. The lock had never been meant to keep her in completely. It had been meant to slow her, to remind her. She passed into the corridor. The first guard sat slumped on a stool near the back stairs, chin resting against his chest, breath shallow but steady. He had not been careless, he had been predictable. Eliza slipped past him, counting each step, each board that might complain under pressure. She did not touch him. This was not about escape, it was about correction. The study door stood slightly ajar, candlelight flickered inside, casting uneven shadows across the maps. Carver had not slept. That too Eliza had anticipated. She paused at the threshold, listening to the cadence of his movements, the slow pacing, the brief stops, the faint scrape of a chair being nudged aside. "You shouldn't be up," Carver said without turning. Eliza stepped fully into the room. "Neither should you," she replied. He turned then, his face drawn, the lines around his eyes deeper than they had been days ago. His control, so carefully maintained, showed the first visible fractures. "He has a problem," he said. "You invited him," Eliza answered. "I underestimated him," Carver said, "and overestimated my ability to manage him." Eliza moved closer to the maps, her eyes scanning them automatically, not for information but for comfort. "Familiar errors anchored her in the present. He knows," she said. "He suspects," Carver corrected. "There's a difference." "There won't be for long," she said. Carver exhaled slowly. "I will send him away this morning." "You should have done it yesterday," Eliza replied. "Yes," he said quietly. "I should have." The sound of footsteps echoed faintly from the front of the house, heavy, uneven. The visitor was awake. Eliza felt the decision settle into place with a clarity that surprised even her. "He won't leave," she said. Carver looked at her sharply. "That is not your concern." "It became my concern the moment he looked at me like property he hadn't paid for yet," she said. Carver, as jaw tightened. "I told you no one here would touch you. You can't promise what you can't control," Eliza said. The footsteps drew closer. Carver moved instinctively toward the door, but Eliza caught his sleeve, not roughly, not pleadingly, simply enough to stop him. "You bought silence," she said. "But silence isn't passive." His gaze dropped to her hand, then back to her face. "What are you saying?" he asked. "I am saying this is where your restraint becomes betrayal," she replied, "and mine becomes survival." The visitor entered the study without knocking. He looked flushed, his hair disheveled, his coat half-buttoned. The smell of last night, slicker, clung to him. His eyes flicked between Carver and Eliza, assessing the space, the tension. "Up early," he said cheerfully. "Could eat sleep." Carver straightened. "You'll all be leaving this morning." The visitor laughed. "Will I?" "Yes," Carver said, immediately. The man's smile faded, replaced by something colder. "You forget," he said. "I did come here for hospitality." Carver's voice hardened. "You came under false pretenses." "I came because I was invited," the man replied, "and because what you are sitting on is worth more than your pride." His gaze slid to Eliza again. "You ever consider," he said to her, "what you might earn if you shared what you know?" Eliza met his eyes steadily. "You ever consider," she said, "how many people would have to die for you to enjoy it?" The man chuckled. "People die every day." "Yes," she said, usually screaming. The tension snapped. The visitor lunged not at Eliza, but toward the desk, toward the maps. His hand closed around the edge of a parchment, crumpling it as he yanked it free. Carver moved at the same moment, faster than Eliza expected, grabbing the man's arm. "Stop!" Carver shouted. The visitor twisted, wrenching himself loose with surprising strength. The map tore partially, ink smearing. Too late, the man said, breathing hard. "I've seen enough." He reached into his coat. Eliza moved. She crossed the distance between them in 3 silent steps, her movement smooth, controlled. She did not strike wildly. She did not hesitate. Her hand closed around the visitor, his wrist just as he drew the knife. She twisted not with brute force, but with precision. The knife clattered to the floor. The man snarled, swinging his other arm. Eliza ducked, felt the rush of displaced air against her cheek. She stepped inside his reach, drove her shoulder into his chest, sending him stumbling backward. Carver stared. He had known she was capable. He had not known how much. The visitor recovered quickly, rage flashing across his face. He charged again, this time with both hands outstretched. Eliza sidestepped, seized his sleeve, and used his momentum against him. He crashed into the edge of the desk, gasping as the air left his lungs. She did not give him time to recover. Her fingers closed around his throat, not crushing, not yet, just enough to remind him of its fragility. "You should have left," she said quietly. The man struggled, clawing at her hands, his face purpling. "Eliza," Carver said sharply. "Stop." She did not look at him. "This is the cost of curiosity," she said to the man, "and of greed." She released him abruptly. He collapsed to his knees, coughing violently, gulping air like a drowning man. For a moment Eliza thought it was over. She was wrong. The man surged upward unexpectedly, desperation lending him speed. His hand closed around the knife on the floor. He slashed wildly. Eliza felt the heat of the blade skim her arm, a shallow cut, immediate and sharp. Blood welled, bright against her bronze skin. Something inside her hardened. Before Carver could intervene, Eliza stepped forward and drove the heel of her palm into the man's throat. There was a sound, wet, final. The visitor stuttered backward, eyes wide with shock, hands clawing uselessly at his neck. He took 2 unsteady steps, then fell heavily onto the study floor. Silence crashed down around them. The candle guttered. Carver stared at the body, then at Eliza's bloodied arm, then back at the body. "You promised," he said hoarsely. "I promised not to leave," Eliza replied. "I did. He promised not to act." "You've killed him," Carver said. "Yes," she said simply. "And now he won't tell what he could to fully understand." Carver dragged a hand down his face. "This will not go unnoticed," he said. "He has associates. Questions will be asked." Eliza nodded. They already were. She stepped away from the body, her movements calm, methodical. She pressed a cloth to her arm, tying it off with practiced efficiency. "What happens now?" Carver asked. Eliza looked at him, then not with defiance, not with fear, but with something like clarity. "Now," she said, "your house becomes a liability." The fog thickened outside the windows, pressing close. Carver swallowed. "You told me you would stay," he said. "I told you I would survive," Eliza replied. "Those are not the same thing." The house listened, and for the first time it understood that the rules had changed. The body was still on the floor when the first sound reached them, not from inside the house, but from beyond it. A distant shout, muffled by fog, then another. Somewhere down the street, a door slammed, footsteps followed, hurried and uneven, the kind born of urgency rather than routine. Carver turned slowly toward the windows. "They'll notice he hasn't. He returned," he said. He was expected. Eliza knelt beside the body, not out of reverence, but necessity. She checked the man's pockets with efficient calm, fingers quick and precise. A purse of coins. A folded note with 2 names written in a heavy hand. A hotel receipt dated the previous day. She handed the paper to Carver. "Those are the first questions," she said. "Who he told. Where he stayed." Carver stared at the note, then at her. "You've done this before." "Not like this," she replied. "But I've watched it done." She stood, wiping her hands on the already ruined cloth tied around her arm. The cut burned, but it was shallow. Pain was information, nothing more. Carver paced the study, his earlier composure now fractured beyond repair. "This house is compromised," he said. "Everything I've built, every precaution. was always temporary, Eliza interrupted. You can't sit on a fault line and pretend the earth won't move. He stopped pacing and looked at her sharply. You're enjoying this? No, she said. I am accepting it. The house seemed to lean inward around them, as if listening more closely now that the truth had been spoken aloud. What do we do? Carver asked. Eliza glanced at the maps. We stop pretending the danger is contained in me, she said, and start preparing for what is already spreading. As if summoned by her words, another sound rose, this time unmistakable. Horses. Not close yet, but coming. Carver swore under his breath. They're early, he said. Too early. Eliza crossed the study and began pulling maps from the walls, not all of them, only the ones that mattered. She stacked them neatly, aligning their edges. What are you doing? Carver demanded. Removing your illusion, she replied. She tore the first map cleanly down the center. Carver froze. Do you have any idea? Yes, she said. Exactly. She tore another and another, not violently, not carelessly. Each rip deliberate, each destruction targeted, roots that could be inferred, connections that could be reconstructed by the wrong mind. You said yourself, she continued, they don't know the land. They only know fragments. These fragments are bait. She shoved the ruined papers into the hearth and struck a match. The flame caught quickly, devouring ink and parchment alike. Smoke curled upward, sharp and acrid. Carver watched years of work burn in silence. The sound of hooves grew louder. Go, Eliza said. Carver did move. They want to believe you, he said. They'll believe me. They won't believe anyone, she replied. They'll take. They'll threaten. They'll look for something solid to punish. She met his eyes. That won't be me. His throat worked as he swallowed. You said you would leave, he said. I said I would leave this house while it was safer inside than out, Eliza replied. That changed when you let him stay. The accusation landed cleanly. Carver looked at the fire again, then at the door, then back at her. Where will you go? He asked. She shook her head. You don't need to know. The horses stopped outside. Voices followed, authoritative, impatient. Carver moved instinctively toward the door. They'll ask for him, he said. They'll search. Yes, Eliza agreed, and they'll find a dead man and a burned study. And you? She lifted her injured arm slightly. I'll already be gone. Carver hesitated, then did something Eliza had not expected. He bowed his head, not deeply, not theatrically, but enough. You were never the danger, he said. I was. Eliza did not soften. Understanding that now does to undo it, she said. But it might save you. She turned and walked toward the back corridor, her steps already blending with the house. As rhythms, her presence slipping into the spaces it forgot to guard. Behind her, the front door was thrown open. Mr. Carver! A voice called. We need a word. Eliza did not look back. She moved through the servants' passage past the kitchen, where the cook stared at her with wide, uncomprehending eyes. Eliza paused only long enough to meet her gaze. Don't speak of me, she said softly. The woman nodded, trembling. Eliza slipped through the back gate just as the fog thickened again, rolling low and dense, swallowing the yard in a gray-white veil. The city shifted around her. She moved quickly now, though not hurried, through alleys, across courtyards, along routes no map ever recorded. Her feet remembered what her mind already knew, where sound died, where shadows pooled, where the ground welcomed light steps. By the time the sun rose fully, Eliza was no longer in the city. Behind her the consequences began to ripple. Carver's house was searched from cellar to attic. The body was found. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Associates were summoned. Letters intercepted. Routes scrutinized. And across the river something else happened. A shipment failed to arrive, then another. A boat grounded where it should not have, its crew swearing the channel had shifted overnight. A guide disappeared. A trusted intermediary was found lost, wandering marshland he claimed to know better than his own home. Whispers followed. The delta had changed. No, it had been changed back. Eliza moved through the outer edges of the city by night, resting by day, the cut on her arm healing cleanly. She avoided roads, avoided lanterns, avoided names. She listened. Men argued. Men panicked. Men blamed one another. The map they had chased for generations was dissolving, not because it was gone, but because it had stopped cooperating. Carver remained in his house, though it no longer belonged to him in any meaningful sense. His influence collapsed quietly, like a structure hollowed out from within. Contracts dissolved, partners distanced themselves, protection vanished. One night, alone in the study, as remains, he realized the truth too late. Containment had never been control, and Eliza had never been the secret. She was the keeper of it. Far south, where the river braided itself into countless veins, Eliza stepped into water that welcomed her like an old friend. Fog rose around her ankles, her knees, her waist. She breathed deeply. The land recognized her, and the impossible secret, never written, never spoken aloud, walked on. The delta did not announce itself. It never had. It revealed itself only to those who understood how to look not with eyes alone, but with patience. To the untrained, it was confusion, water that refused to stay still, land that dissolved into marsh, paths that vanished the moment one believed in them. To Eliza, it was legible. Every bend, every reed bed, every shallow breath of current spoke a language she had learned before she learned to read. She moved south as the days shortened, following the quiet instructions the land offered. Not the river's main body that was watched now, measured, argued over, but the forgotten veins that split and rejoined without logic. Places where the water ran dark, beneath floating green, where sound traveled strangely, swallowed quickly. The fog favored her. It rose at dawn and dusk, cloaking her passage, muting the world into soft grays and browns. In its presence, Eliza felt neither hunted nor hidden. She felt correct, aligned with something older than pursuit. She traveled alone, not because others could not follow, but because they should not. The map in her mind was not meant to be shared, not even now. Especially not now. Word spread anyway, not through documents or declarations, but through absence. A boat that never arrived, a guide who refused a job without explanation, a trader who swore the marsh had rearranged itself overnight. Men argued over charts, redrew lines, blamed one another for failures that could not be traced. They did not speak her name. They did not know it, but they felt her. Eliza rested in places that left no mark, on high ground that flooded only once a year, on narrow tongues of earth that vanished by morning. She slept lightly, waking to birds and insects and the low conversation of water moving where it pleased. The cut on her arm healed cleanly, leaving a thin line that mirrored the scar beneath her collarbone. 2 markers now, 2 survivals. Sometimes at night she remembered her mother, not her face exactly, faces faded, but her hands, the way they moved through water without breaking its surface. The way she spoke of paths as relationships rather than roots. Land remembers, her mother had said, but it only remembers those who listen. Eliza listened. North of her, Julian Carver's name became something people spoke carefully, if at all. His house on Esplanade stood, but it no longer commanded attention. Men who once sought his counsel found reasons to be elsewhere. His letters went unanswered. His influence, never allowed to begin with, thinned until it became irrelevant. He remained alive. That Eliza knew of its own punishment. He would live long enough to understand exactly what he had lost control of. Long enough to replay every decision that led him to believe a human mind could be owned like land. Carver would never see her again. That was intentional. Eliza crossed places where people lived without knowing they lived on the edge of something powerful. Small communities, fisherfolk, maroon settlements, families that existed only because the world had failed to notice them long enough. She did not stop. To stop was to leave a shape behind, and shapes invited attention. As winter approached, the fog thickened, lingering longer each morning. The delta breathed differently now, water levels shifting in ways that frustrated engineers and delighted no one. Plans failed, profits slipped, the machinery of control ground uselessly against uncertainty. Men blamed weather. They always did. One evening, Eliza stood at the edge of a wide marsh, the sky above it heavy with low clouds. The water reflected nothing clearly, neither sky nor land nor her own shape. She knelt and pressed her palm flat against the surface, cold, alive. This was where it ended. Not with the crossing north, not with papers or freedom purchased by proximity to power, but with dissolution into something that could not be chased because it could not be located. Eliza waded forward slowly. The water rose to her knees, then her waist. Her dress darkened, clinging to her legs, but she did not stop. She moved carefully, choosing each step, feeling for the firmness beneath the silt. The fog thickened around her, blurring horizon and ground into a single plane. Behind her, the land receded, Ahead there was no direction that could be named, only continuation. By dawn there were already rumors. A boatman claimed he had seen a woman standing in the marsh at first light, her figure half dissolved by fog, unmoving as the water slid past her. A guard swore someone had called his name from across a channel that did not exist on any chart. No one agreed on details, only on the feeling. They said the marsh had eyes now. They said the fog moved with intention. They said that if you listened closely, you could hear footsteps where no one walked. Eliza did not hear these stories. She did not need to. She moved deeper, farther, until the idea of roads felt abstract and unnecessary. She learned new rhythms, tides that pulsed without warning, birds that signaled danger, wine that spoke more honestly than people ever had. She did not become a savior. She did not become a leader. She did not become a myth in her own mind. She simply endured. When people found their way out of places they should not have survived, when chains failed, when pursuit lost its shape, when escape became possible where it had not been before, it was never clear why. No woman stepped forward to claim credit. No name attached itself to the phenomenon. Only absence explained absence. Years later, someone would write that the delta in the late 1840s and early 1850s behaved unpredictably, that commerce suffered, that certain routes became unusable without explanation, that people disappeared and reappeared farther south than they should have been able to trawl. Historians would argue, some would insist it was coincidence. Others would gesture vaguely toward weather patterns, toward mismanagement, toward myth. None would write her name, because it was never written. Eliza stood one last time at the edge of water just before nightfall, the fog gathering thick around her legs. She lifted her chin slightly, feeling the air cool against her skin. She did not look back. The most beautiful mixed-race girl ever sold in New Orleans ceased to exist. What remained could not be auctioned. The impossible secret did not end. It walked away. Into fog, into water, into memory that refused to be owned.